Welcome back, another in the security series of videos, and this one is on the subject of travellers. And before we get started, I would just like to make it clear I've had good and bad experiences with travellers, so this isn't denigrating travellers as a whole. This is just reporting back some of the more interesting experiences I had. I've also had some, relationships with some travellers that were perfectly fine, and there wasn't really much to report. I cover a bit of that in this, but it was mainly the issues that we suffered in the security world from travellers. There is obviously a percentage of those that caused us problems, and there's another percentage of those that we didn't have any issues with at all. So, getting on with the video. My first big experience with the travelling community was when I was working down on the coast in Brighton, and we were at a strip of clubs on the seafront, and we had West Street in Brighton, which is kind of the main drag down the centre, which is where a lot of the kind of young people, the trendy night spots and all that, they would go along there and make their way along drinking in the pubs and clubs down there. And then you would get down onto the seafront itself, and you've basically got in Brighton a sort of promenade area, and then underneath that there's a whole load of arches, and within those arches there's lots and lots of nightclubs, and there's probably about, I don't know, 10, 12 clubs up and down that thing, and it runs for a mile or so. A lot of the clubs down on the seafront would run from the afternoon and evening in the summer, so they would start opening up about 2 o'clock. They would get a bunch of people sat outside enjoying the kind of beachfront and having a few drinks and stuff, and then that would slowly turn into the evening do as time went on. So we had plenty of work down there, and I knew most of the guys along that front in the late 90s, early 2000s, around about that time. It was during the summer, and we had reports coming on the radio, and it was a report that basically a very large group of travellers was making its way down West Street, and there were some problems. Now, it was pretty standard that very large groups of anyone would struggle to get in a venue, and you might wonder why security do this. It's because they simply cannot control. If they've got one large group that is all friends with each other and all know each other, then if that group decides to get out of hand and they all go against the door team, you might have a door team of 5 guys and you've got a group of 20, 30 people. There's no way you're going to be able to control that amount of people. Because realistically, when security control a nightclub, it's a bit like prison officers in a prison. You've got a whole bunch of people, but all those people you're controlling aren't all working together in unison. You've got lots and lots of small groups, and 1 or 2 of those small groups might start some trouble, but generally speaking, everyone else is pretty much going to stay out of that trouble. So it leaves you to deal with these smaller groups. If you have a group of 15, 20 guys turn up, that's going to be an issue, and some clubs will let them in, some clubs will make a decision not to have groups of a certain size in there, and that's the reason why. So this group was getting knocked back. They were obviously reverting straight away to, you're knocking us back because we're travellers. And I'd worked in lots of places where you would get 2 or 3 traveller guys come in, no problem at all, there wasn't an issue with that. No one was being racist towards them just because of their ethnicity, skin colour, whatever it was. They would be quite welcome to come in and have a drink just as anyone else was. When they turn up and there's 20, 30 or 40 people in a group, there's no way they're going to get in. So they get angry straight away. So we start getting reports on the radio that they're smashing up a couple of the fronts of these venues, they're throwing bottles, they're attacking the door staff and all that kind of thing. A lot of the venues are starting to close up. They're basically bringing everyone inside, shutting up the fronts, and those venues are also getting stuff thrown at them. By now, of course, the police have been informed. We're hearing all this on the radio. The police were also listening in to this radio channel. It was kind of a group thing. You could call out a big shout out, an emergency help type of scenario. I never actually did that because it would have been a huge embarrassment, but you certainly could do if you wished, and I used to hear a few, and we even responded to a few of those. The police knew what was going on. We then heard on the radio that police had been in attendance and they were basically monitoring the situation, which I thought sounded slightly odd. As time went on, this group made it down towards the seafront, and as I said, there was a long string of clubs down there, so they were right down one of the far ends, and we could kind of hear across the radio some commotions going on. They were getting turned away because, of course, by now they've also, assaulted people, they've damaged property. There's no way on earth any of the clubs or the door staff are going to warrant them to come in. And they're still saying, you don't want us in because we're travellers, we're gypsies. And people are saying, well, no, it's actually because we've heard you've been smashing the place up and you're an absolute nightmare. So we can see them working down. I actually walked down to take a look at what was going on and just, assess the situation, because I figured they would be heading our way. And I was kind of surprised to see that the police were standing off. There was about 4 or 5 police there, and they were recording the goings on, but they weren't really doing much. And I went over to the police and said, what's going on? I'm working down the road there, and I'm a bit concerned as to, these guys are going to make their way down. And they said, look, they're a big group. We're pretty short on staff. We're just going to monitor what they're doing and then, leave us to deal with it. Don't engage. And I said, look, we've all been paid a fee to protect this club, and we will carry that out. And we're not going to be, backing down. They're going to obviously try and cause us some grief, and they won't be allowed to damage the club, and they won't be allowed in. And the police were saying, we don't recommend that. If you engage with them, you could be arrested. So I told them I wasn't very happy about that. I said we had every right to defend ourselves and defend the property. They argued that they didn't think we did, which is incorrect. That's not the first time I've been told things that are incorrect by the police, but there we go. So I walked back to the club. I've got a good team there, the club there and a couple of the clubs either side. They all had good lads in them, and the one that I was at, there was a particularly strong team. I always made sure we worked in areas where there were good guys. I left a few places because the teams were so weak and they wouldn't replace those guys. So there were times where I just decided that, enough was enough. I wasn't going to be working with people I couldn't trust. So this one had a good combination of people that were sort of MMA fighters, boxers, people that had done the door for years and really knew their business, ex-mill, they were a really solid bunch of dudes. We also had there a couple of the South African guys, which were in one of my other security stories. They were involved in slapping one of the EastEnders characters around when they found him in the toilet, if you remember that. They happened to be working, I think, at one of the clubs next door, so they were standing around as well. And they were both rugby players, and they were both pretty handy as well, and they were typically South African, so they just didn't give an F about anything, basically. So we see these guys come in, and sure enough, in the end, they turn up at our place, and there's 40 odd people. And there was a small amount of women, but let's get this straight, the women were absolutely huge, covered in tattoos, and maybe even more aggressive than the men were. So they were not to be taken lightly, and they were clearly all up for a fight. And meanwhile, the police are still recording all this stuff that's going on. A couple of them come over and they say, we want to come in, we've been trying to get in, no one's going to let us in because they're all racist and they don't like us, and we want to come in your place. And I said, well, I've just been up and watched you guys, chucking bottles, trying to goad the staff out for a fight. And I said, there's no way after having seen that I can let you in. I said, if you guys had turned up in smaller groups, and come up in a pleasant manner, I'd have no issue with you, but there's no way on earth that I'm going to let you in. And they said, well, we're going to make your life hell, we're going to come and give you some grief. And I said, well, we're all here, we're all outside, that's no problem at all, but we won't allow you to damage the venue, basically. These guys walk back, and I go back to the door, and there's a whole bunch of us there, a few of the doormen from the clubs next door, etc. as well. And then we start getting stuff chucked at us, so then there's a very large brawl. The police are shouting over, saying stop, stop, and whatever. No one listens to them. It almost reminded me of like a cowboy film, except it was more unpleasant, because it wasn't like people got bopped on the chin and then comedically fell over and then got up half an hour later and nothing was wrong. You know, people were getting seriously hurt, including a couple of our guys. But they were incredibly unfit, this group. They weren't particularly technically skilled. They were just quite rough. The women actually got involved, and the women made the mistake of attacking one of the South African guys. And the South African guys weren't big into the kind of gallantry thing. We didn't really have any more trouble from that lot. I think they were from out of town, so it wasn't people that we would kind of be facing every week, and that was pretty standard fare in Brighton. You would get lots and lots of people come from out of town and make problems. We had all kinds of gang related stuff from London, which I'll probably do another video about, but yeah, that was pretty normal behaviour. The next one I had an issue with, this was some years later, and I received a phone call, and it was a pub that was right out in the countryside in kind of a very quiet, unassuming little village. And the guy on the phone said he would like me to come over to the pub, and he wanted to chat to me about some security that I'd been recommended by someone. So I said sure, headed over there. It was a beautiful little village, very quaint, you know, nice village pub, the kind of thing you would take your mum and dad to for a nice Sunday dinner, something like that. Really, really pretty, lovely beer garden, smells of good food, real ale, all that kind of stuff. And I got in there, everyone seemed very friendly, and I'm thinking, why on earth would a beautiful, quaint little village pub like this be looking for security? I think maybe the guy's got other pubs, you know, maybe he needs me somewhere else. So I sit down and start talking to him, and he was actually pretty upset. You know, he started visibly getting really upset when he was talking to me, and he said, look, I've got a big problem. We've had some travellers coming in. They generally come in at the weekends on a Friday night or a Saturday night. And they come in, you know, I serve them because I don't want to serve them since they started playing up, but I don't have much choice because there's just me and my wife and a couple of the bar staff here. And there's just a lot of locals, which are generally older people and just nice family types. And they start getting nasty. They demand a tab, basically, so they won't pay for their drinks, and they demand I give them the drinks. And then at the end of the night, they just refuse to pay for any of the drinks they've had. I've tried not allowing them to have the drinks, and then they just basically push me out the way. They take the drinks from behind the bar anyway, they serve themselves, and they've even been going around pushing the locals off chairs and stealing their drinks and just throwing their weight around. So he said it's really affected my trade. People are too frightened to come in here for food, and you know, I'm losing a lot of money. I would like to quote me and how much it's going to cost to keep these people out and get rid of them. So I said, yeah, no problem. I'll put a little team together. We can come up on a Friday and Saturday night and just we'll just monitor the situation for the first week or so, and then we'll see how it goes from there. But it'll be, you know, reasonably priced. So we turn up the first Friday. I've put a team together. The team I've put together is pretty badass, to be fair. So I had a guy called Raf, who was a Polish wrestling instructor. And he was quite a wiry looking guy, but he was phenomenally good at wrestling. He was an MMA instructor. You know, he had had quite a few MMA fights in the semi-pro world. So he was definitely not to be messed with. I mean, I used to spar with him and wrestle with him, and he could easily stick me on my arse. And he was probably a couple of stone less than me, maybe a couple of inches taller, but certainly a lot thinner. Then I had a guy called Tom. Tom was actually a really good boxer, but he was kind of overweight. His nickname was the Daddy because he had pictures of his kids on his boxing trunks that he used to wear. And he would typically turn up for boxing matches completely out of shape. He had quite a big beer gut. Really, really nice guy. He had a bunch of missing teeth. He'd sort of grin at you with all these teeth missing. And I remember him like turning up for a fight, and he sat down in the VIP section, and they said, well, you're fighting soon, what are you doing? And he said, well, I've heard there's a free dinner. And he actually ate the roast dinner that they normally give to all the people that go to watch the fight in the VIP area. He ate one of them with literally 15 minutes before he was due to go on. He just sat there, stuffed his face. He had half a pint of beer as well. And then he got up and just climbed into the ring randomly when it was his turn to go in. He didn't care about like entry music or anything. He would often fight with really, really, really good shaped guys that had like visible abs, really worked hard, Tom would sort of wobble into the ring, but the guy had super good hands. He was also a very handy kickboxer, and he used to win a lot of fights, you know, because people didn't take him seriously, and they should have done. He had pretty amazing stamina as well. Like, people would assume he would gas in the first round, and he was just an incredibly determined guy. He was kind of like a smaller version of Butterbean, I suppose, a lot smaller, but still, you know, people would not think he was a decent boxer, and he was in fact very, very good indeed. I then had an absolute monster of a guy called Mike. Mike was benching about 230 kilos raw. He was about 6'4". His arm was like the size of most people's legs. He wasn't a trained fighter, but he was just brutally strong. You know, he was probably in the top 1% of people I've ever met of that kind of strength. Ridiculously strong grip strength. He had huge hands. Like, he looked incredibly imposing. He had a kind of very nasty looking face as well. He looked like he'd probably eat your kids. And he was quite handy to have around because people just didn't want to mess around with him. So sure enough, we're all stood there, and we're in the place, couple of us out by the door, couple of us in the pub on a Friday night. Everything's going fine. A few of the locals have come back in, according to the landlord, because he's obviously told them there's security staff on. They may have come to watch the show, or they might have come because they felt a bit safer. So we're there. Sure enough, a group of about 15 guys turns up, a couple of women with them, but mainly guys, and we straight away work out these are going to be the dudes that he's talking about. So they come in. There's a couple that are noticeably bigger than the others and are sort of pushing themselves around within the group, and they're clearly the leaders, if you like. You know, you can see by the body language and what they're saying that they're the bosses of the group. So they clock us pretty quickly, and they actually just paid for their drinks, and they stood outside in the beer garden. So we all went outside in the beer garden as well. We're stood by one of the back doors, and we got a couple of the guys already out there. And a big blonde fellow in this group walks over to me, and he said, "Oh, what are you guys doing here?" And I said, "Oh, there've been some problems here, you know, in the past, and we're here to make sure there's no more problems." And he said, "Oh, really? What's that?" And I said, "Well, a group of travellers have been coming in and, you know, pushing their weight around." He said, "Well, you know, we're travellers. I don't think anyone's been doing that." And I said, "Well, weird, huh? You know, I don't know what's going on there." And we kind of played that game for a while. You know, he sort of made out he didn't know what I was talking about. In the end, he came over again, you know, and he started talking again, and he said, "Look, what about one of our top boys?" He said, "He's our top lad over there. What about we put him against your top lad? And if we win, then you lot just clear off and you don't come back here. And if you win, we'll all clear off." And I said, "Yeah, sounds reasonable." He was a bit taken aback by that, because the guy that he was pointing at, they were big lumps. You know, one of them was probably 6'3", and he was definitely a heavy dude. He was probably about 19, 20 stone, but they were a little bit out of shape. They weren't muscular, they weren't in great shape, they didn't look like they'd done a lot of training. I've no doubt they could have a fight, but they looked in bad shape, and they obviously drink a lot of beer. So I said, "That's fine, you know, who do you want to go with?" And he sort of looked over and he said, "Well, you seem pretty confident, so I'll pick one of the other guys." I said, "Yeah, no problem." So he's looked, he said, "Well, definitely not that guy." And he's looking at Mike, this huge guy that I'm talking about. He didn't want to fight him. And I said, "Yeah, all right, whatever." And he looks at Tom and he said, "Well, I don't like the look of him." And he didn't want to fight him either. And then he looks at the wrestling instructor and he said, we'll have a fight with him, you know, my man against him in the car park." And he said, "And we'll bet on it, you know, we'll put a couple of grand on it." I said, "Yeah, fine, no problem, we'll put the couple of grand down, and if we win, you guys have to clear off." So sure enough, you know, the guy comes over and there's a bit of chatting going on, and then they back out. And this is what happens quite regularly. We get these kind of offers on the door. People talk a lot of bullshit, and then when it comes down to it, they don't want to, and they say, "Oh, we think you're setting us up." And we kind of were setting them up, because to be fair, Raf would have absolutely minced this guy. You know, the bloke wouldn't have known what the hell was going on. They probably never wrestled anyone in their entire lives, and we certainly weren't agreeing to Queensberry rules. That might have been their preference, but I made it clear there would be no rules. So they didn't like that, and they left. They all disappeared off, didn't come back. We were there probably 4 or 5 weeks after that. Pub was running great, no problem at all. Everything was going fine. And then the landlord came over one night. He said, look boys, you know, you've done your job. I don't need you here anymore. I'll just pay you up for tonight and then we'll call it good. I was kind of annoyed with him because I would have expected a little bit of notice at least, you know, just paying us up for that night and then kind of getting rid of us. But also I said to him, look, if we go, those guys will be straight back because they're local. They're only down the road 20, 30 minutes. And as soon as they hear that we're not around anymore, they're going to come back. So he kind of took that as like I was being threatening to him. I wasn't. That's not my style. I didn't need to. I could get plenty of other work. So we left him to it. We disappeared off. Didn't go back there. But I got a call 2 weeks later and a friend of mine rang up and he said, you know that pub you were doing? And I said, yeah. He said they had a couple of SIA guys turn up the following week, you know, just sort of muppets with badges on their arms or whatever. They were sort of 9 stone, piss wet through, didn't look like they could fight their way out of a wet paper bag. And I said, yeah, kind of figures, you know, he's going to obviously staff it with people that are a lot cheaper than we were. And he said, well, the week later after that, those guys came back and they absolutely smashed the place to pieces. They beat up the owner. They basically, one of the door guys just legged it. The other one got a kick in. He didn't even put up a fight. They just basically chucked him around the pub for a laugh. A couple of the customers got pasted. The police could never do anything about this because by the time the police got there, it was out in the middle of nowhere. The police would take half an hour to arrive, maybe even more. And by the time that had happened, everyone had cleared off. And of course, the customers would say, it was this big group of travellers, you know, and the police are like, oh, great, yeah, we haven't got much chance of doing anything about that. So really disappointed for that guy. I think they went on to sell the pub. It went off to someone else, and I don't know what happened to it after that. But I was pretty sad that he took that kind of attitude, and that was generally the story with security. You know, often on these smaller jobs, we would get called in, we would clear out a gang or a bunch of unpleasant customers that had kind of taken over a place, and then as soon as the owners felt that they could scrimp a bit more money, they would clear us off out as well, and then of course they would start having problems again, and they would burn their bridges because I would never go back after that. I'd always advise them, you know, you might want to reduce the door team, but at least keep a couple of us there, because then if we need to, we can call the other guys in for backup, but it would be sensible to keep us on. They wouldn't listen. I did actually go on to become quite friendly with a traveller near us, and that was kind of through some door work that I'd had going on, where we did have some significant problems with some travellers, and they were making threats to myself and some of the other doormen and talking about coming down there and doing some really unpleasant stuff to us. So I wasn't very happy about that, and I made arrangements to meet one of the head guys. I ended up going up to Surrey and met some big guy in Surrey that was kind of the boss of a whole load of these travellers. And I had to sit down with him. He was pretty dubious of me to start with, but we built a bit of rapport. I wasn't going there really for any, you know, hassle. I wasn't giving him any grief. I was just straight talking with him. I said, look, we're doing security. We're running, you know, a load of stuff down on the south coast. We're getting some grief off of your boys. They've made some threats. We're just doing our jobs and we can't have it. And it's going to be a problem for everyone. You know, if we're having this kind of stuff going on, my guys aren't going to take it. Your guys obviously aren't going to take it. None of us need the hassle. Let's kind of make a gentleman's agreement, because there's no win, you know, there's no prize at the end of any of this apart from a whole load of grief. And he was pretty much in agreement. He was pretty savvy, and he said, yeah, I totally agree. My boys should be being a bit more constructive with their time. There's no financial reward in it. They're just being dicks. He said, if you say the same to your guys, and he said, all I'd ask is if me and a couple of my boys want to come to one of your places, then you just let us in. We won't give you any grief. We'll have a, you know, a deal on it. And he shook my hand on that. And I got quite friendly with him after that. I did used to let him in, and he was always good. In fact, quite a few times he helped me out when there was some problems. You know, he would sort of walk over, because he was a pretty imposing looking guy, and he would have a word in someone's ear and tell them to shut up, and it actually saved me doing a job. But he told me quite a lot of interesting stuff that he said, look, I don't mind you, he said, but you'll never be my mate. He said, because you're gorgy. And a gorgy is what the travellers would refer to as someone who's just a non-traveller, you know, someone from outside of their circle. And he said, for us, we're never going to 100% trust you. You'll never be fully within our group. You'll never be one of my best buds. But he said, I like you, you like me, so we'll get on in that regard. But other than that, you know, I warn you, he said, don't do any business with any of us. And I couldn't believe that he was saying that to me, because we got on. But he said, yeah, if you ever do business with any of my boys, they will try and have you over, because you're not one of us. And he said, they'll probably try and have you over if even if you were one of us, but even more so that you're gorgy, they definitely won't treat you well. So that was kind of an eye-opener for me. So I had a good and a bad relationship that I was very wary of, and that lasted a while. You know, I used to see that bloke on and off. I think he ended up going to prison for something, so after that I didn't catch up with him again. But a kind of useful connection. Whenever we had problems with the travelling community, then I could ring this guy up. He would generally make a couple of calls. Sometimes a couple of blokes would even turn up on his behest, and they would speak in the right ears, and then everyone would kind of say, fair enough, mate, and they would go home. Made my life a hell of a lot easier. That is about it. I hope that was entertaining for you. I've got a load of other security stories. I'm just working through which ones I can actually tell that aren't too unpleasant for YouTube. I don't want to kind of get banned off the platform or cause anyone any grief by putting anyone's names out there or anything like that. So I'm kind of cleaning a few of the stories up slightly, and then hopefully I'll bring you some of those as well. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate all the subscribers. We've got loads of new subscribers, so I'm very thankful, and I'll try and answer any of the comments below. If you've had any interesting dealings with the travelling community, stick the comments below. As always, keep it sensible, keep it articulate. I don't want a bunch of random abuse. I just delete those. So let's have a discussion. If you are from the travelling community, let me know what you think, and I'll be interested to hear your side of things. Thanks for watching. Take care. I'll catch you next time.